Gattuso. We are joined here today by Codie Sanchez. She is the publisher of Contrarian Thinking, has a background in, what is it, like finance advising? Can you explain a little bit to us about your background, what you got you into newsletters? And then she's going to talk to us today about the business of acquiring newsletters and some really non-traditional revenue models that she writes about in her newsletters that have had like wildfire growth. So welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I started off in as a journalist, actually. So this is coming full circle. But yeah, exactly. I used to be a conflict journalist along the U.S.-Mexico border, talking about human trafficking, drug trafficking, human rights. Really interesting stuff. And then kind of quickly found that while I loved journalism, I felt like I wasn't making the impact that I wanted. I was, raising awareness, but I wasn't making change. And so I decided to go into finance because I found the one difference between me with my last name Sanchez and all the people on the other side of the border with their last name Sanchez was socioeconomics, right? Because I had more money and I came from a family that had more money. Middle class in America was, quite high class in Mexico. And so I climbed up in the finance realm from asset management and alternatives and investment banking and private equity and venture capital, and now sit as a partner at a venture capital, late stage venture capital firm, early stage private equity. We do buy companies outright, and we also take minority shares in them. And so what I basically did is a couple things. One, in finance, there's a saying that is, we get rich quietly. And I never liked that saying very much. I was like, it doesn't sound that fun to me. I'd rather like get rich with my buds, and we all get to do it together. And so I started writing a newsletter called Contrarian Thinking that was about how to think critically and cash flow unconventionally. And that's what got us to today. And I write about the stuff I've learned in private equity and in venture capital, and how we can all sort of step outside of the norm from a cash flow perspective, and also from a questioning everything around us perspective.
So when did you launch Contrarian Thinking?
I launched it in January of 2020.
Okay, so very interesting year to launch a newsletter. Many people launched a newsletter, but they did it post-pandemic. So it's interesting that you were riding that wave before. Had you built up an audience of suddenly eager to jump on some of your ideas, people before the pandemic and lockdown and some of the financial situations had hit?
Well, I, for years, have been relatively public, not in a huge way, but, I have a couple 100,000 across social media followers by now, across platform, no one platform with that many. And I just would kind of post about stuff that I thought was interesting. So I probably had a list of, a couple thousand people, but I never sent them anything. I never emailed them anything. And what started it for me is I don't, leave politics and all that aside. I don't like anybody to tell me that I can't ask questions or think critically. That's journalism 101, right? Question everything. Because I'd take a curious human over a very intelligent but uncurious one any day. And so that's what I was feeling in the public narrative was we were losing this ability to think for ourselves and to question things. And we were losing it publicly in a lot of ways. And we were even losing it with how to think about investing and finance and having diversified revenue streams. And that annoyed me. And so that's why I started writing about it.
Okay. So where do you fall in the scheme of social media is doom scrolling, is the death of our brains, or the death of true democracy and being able to have a full spectrum of knowledge about a topic versus what one particular party wants you to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all saw Social Dilemma and thought, yikes, what's going on here? But beyond that, I actually think there's huge benefits to social media. The problem is that you can't be lazy. And that, if you're lazy and you only follow one side of anything, you're going to be hugely slanted and not have a full story. And so that's the reason why you have to have multiple sources as a journalist. And it's a reason why if you're going to do investing, you have to do lots of due diligence on any investment that you make. Everything that leads to you making more money or making more understanding within yourself leads to lots of questions and work on your side. The thing about social media is I think it makes people lazy, just like Google does, because we can very easily just ask Google this and we don't have to store the knowledge. We don't have to think about it. We allow these other platforms to think for ourselves.
And you don't even know you're being lazy. Like you think you're
Yeah.
actually, finding answers to things. So great
Yeah.
pivotal moment to launch a newsletter. Contrarian thinking grew quickly. Can you talk to us a little bit about audience growth over the last year? I guess, because it's January now. This will probably air at the end of January or beginning of February. So how did growth happen for Contrarian thinking? And then how did that lead to like the newsletter acquisition model?
Yeah. So if you go to contrarianthinking.substack.com, there's a post in there that gives the first 30 days. So when I started the newsletter, the 30 days following, how did I get to my first 10,000 subscribers? And I tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, the embarrassing. And
I love that though, because you bring people along for the journey, which is half of what I think like good, authentic marketing ought to be.
Exactly. And you grow in public, right? So, and it feels more real than a rented mansion and a Lamborghini, right? And so, so basically I have it, if you want to go really detailed, you can check that out. But the moral of the story, here's where I think the fatal flaw is for people, because momentum is a cruel mistress. She works really well if momentum is in your favor, and she doesn't work so well for you if your momentum is in negative habits. And so, when you first start a newsletter, everybody says the first 1,000 subscribers is super hard. I totally disagree. I think your first 1,000 subscribers is actually your easiest. And the reason why is because we don't realize that, yes, with the phone and social media and our contacts that we've emailed in our Gmail accounts over the past, 10 or 15 years that we've all had email, we've actually accumulated a lot of humans in our network. We just get scared to announce to them that we're building something. And so the biggest thing that I think we did different off the board that got, momentum going pretty quickly is I hand emailed like maybe 500, like individually, no nonsense, hand emailed, 500 people that I thought were centers of influence that I know, people that I knew would spread the word for me, the templates on that post of mine. And I just said, hey, it seems like the world's sort of dividing us. And it seems like we're not asking questions. And it seems like we all better diversify our revenue streams. Let's all talk about it. And I can't see it, right now as much as I want to. And that was before we were even on lockdown, but I still felt that way. I felt like I want to engage with people, but I don't get to see you weekly. So I'm going to start a newsletter. There's going to be a comment section, and it's not a linear conversation. The point is that I want to go back and forth. I'd rather have 500 really engaged subscribers that I learn from than a million where I'm giving all the insight and I get nothing in return.
Right.
And so that first email led to the first, couple hundred subscribers pretty quickly. And then I mass emailed with an opt-in, I didn't mandate, to all of my contacts, everybody in Google, everybody in my phone. I'm sure there were some ex-boyfriends in there that I didn't, want to. But I emailed them all and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'd love you to come along for the ride. And what amazed me is how many did. And so we got to our first 1,000 and 2,000 subscribers pretty quickly because you'll be amazed. I mean, you can download your contacts in LinkedIn. You can download your contacts from your phone. You can download your Google other contacts. And pretty quickly, I had like 6,000 people I could email and say, hey, do you want to come along for the ride? And it turns out we all have about that. Even my mom, who's basically tech inept, had about 3,000 contacts that she could have pinged.
I love that. Okay, so you reached out to your audience that was already in your connection, like your sphere, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How did that grow exponentially? You spent a lot of time promoting.
Yeah, I mean, I like would love to be one of those humans that's like, oh, they just found me, just all a couple million of them.
Posted stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like, no, I've never had that. So I have to drag them kicking and screaming typically. But so those first couple thousand came pretty easily. And by easily, I mean, we did the work, but if you follow the playbook, it works. It's not a click of a button, but it's not trying to land, a rocket on Mars. There's a process to it. And then after the first couple thousand, I have just like a rotation. I'm sure what everybody does. So I tried to take my content, push it out across all social media platforms with real value add every single time. What's different about contrarian thinking, I think, is I don't tell people what they should do. I tell people what I've done, and I show people what I've done. And so there's a difference there because you're like, oh, well, Codie, here's actually Codie's real numbers of how I just wrote one
Mhm.
today on how, to buy a modular home and save, 2/3 of the asking price. And so I went and I looked at it and I kind of went into depth on it and then I wrote it out. And
Mhm.
so that to me was like what Tim Ferriss did back in the day with biohacking and with time saving. He talked about what he really did and he used the strategies himself, and people resonated with that. So I try to do the same thing.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of like the early bloggers who were like renovating their house and taking you through every step of like the caulking or whatever.
Yes.
Um, okay, so then that play, what amount of time? Because you have this is a side hustle, right? Like you have
Yeah.
another existence besides your
Yep.
newsletter. So, what amount of time were you able to put into those growth promotional efforts?
Yeah. So, I mean, for the last, let's call it 7 or 8 years, I've had, multiple companies that I invest in or buy or build or whatever. So I had a
Hmm.
little uniqueness in that the last job I had, I said would be my last job ever. And, the thing was that it was quite profitable. But I don't really like people telling me what to do. And it's a character flaw. And and also I don't like anybody owning me. I don't think any
Hmm.
employer should be able to own your time and tell you that you cannot do other things because you work for me in this. I will never respond to somebody saying I am X only, being an
Hmm.
employee, insert name at a company. I just think that's actually super irresponsible. It'd be like investing in the stock market and putting it all in one single stock. And we've
Hmm.
seen in this pandemic that ain't a good idea. You need diversified income forms. So the one thing to maybe think about doing, upfront is twofold. If you're within a company, sometimes they get a little uneasy as you have success in your side endeavors,
Right.
often.
Right.
And
Let's think
so
about like Deuce. Do you
yeah,
remember that? Yeah.
yes, yeah, exactly. So
Hmm.
it's funny. um,
I'm showing my age.
Yeah, that's great. You're exactly right. So I think the deal there is either, don't have something with your name on it, so nobody really knows what you're growing and how big it's
Hmm.
getting. Or if you have it with your name on it, set expectations up front. And that's what I did in this one. So I'm a partner at a venture capital and private equity fund. And I also run a business called Unconventional Acquisitions. It's a business that we teach people how to do M&A. And I
Hmm.
have a slew of other ventures. So now I have this diversified portfolio. As far as time allotment, that gets tricky. I'm a little bit crazy. I mean, I have here in front of me, you can like see what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. But basically, like every single day, I have a playbook in front of me that lists out every
Hmm.
single hour what I'm doing for each hour, even in half-hour increments. And I do that the night before and have a high overview every Sunday night so that I know how much time am I putting into contrarian thinking versus UA versus EEC. And I need big chunks of time because I'm super ADD in order to handle any of them.
Hmm.
So contrarian thinking for me takes about 2 to 3 hours to write a week. It's a
Okay.
weekly newsletter. You get it once a week. And then to promote, I try to allocate 5 to 6 hours a week. Now I'm just now hiring some people after hitting 100K
Yay.
subs. Yay. So now those 5 to 6 hours are usually managing those people as opposed to going and doing the actual growth hacking myself.
Hmm. So if you have 100K, 100K subs, and you're in hiring mode, the question I have is like, what is your revenue model? Because this is still free, correct? Do you have a paid version? Where's
Yes.
the?
Well, so we'll see. When this comes out, we're launching Contrarian Cash Flow.
Okay.
And so Contrarian Cash Flow will be so imagine each week we do these deep dives on a specific area. Like we're going to talk about the one about newsletter acquisition, where I basically show
Hmm.
you, hey, I'm looking at acquiring this newsletter. Here's how I model it. Here's how I found it. Here's how I think about it. and now you try to play. And so what I realized is people were really liking those, but they wanted like a tiny bit more handholded. Like, how do we
Hmm.
really do it and take it to the next level? And so I'm going to create a premium newsletter that each month, one time a month, we're going to take one newsletter from the four that we give out. And we'll do an in-person phone call like this. There'll be Q&A. All the contrarian cash flowers can be on there. And we'll do a breakdown of exactly what I did in tandem with an expert that's also done it. So there's multiple perspectives
Okay.
on it. And then we'll have a playbook. So we'll basically do something that we're calling Contrarian Vault, where we'll put in the vault, hey, here's a bunch of resources. If you want to go buy a newsletter, here's the top 10 sites to do it. Here's like a due diligence questionnaire you should ask them. And so the idea is, I have a goal. I want to have 100,000 people reach financial freedom with the Contrarian Thinking helping in some way.
Hmm.
And so we'll keep track of it. And each month, I want to help people create financial freedom through doing some of these ideas. So that's going to be our premium. But right now, we monetize it all through info products. So my other business, Unconventional Acquisitions,
Hmm.
is a course and education business and a
Okay.
mastermind. And so before I made anybody pay for just my ideas, I said, here's like a very tangible course on how to do M&A, and and you can pay for that. And so
Okay.
that became our monetization strategy.
Okay. So that is just like subtly promoted within the newsletter. I don't notice that you're shouting about it in any too many instances. Is that the case,
Good.
or have I just gotten a few issues where I've like skimmed it?
Yeah, it's not even in every one.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think the goal is like people find you when they need you.
Hmm.
And so, I put it in, it's probably in like one of every three newsletters.
Okay.
What we might start doing maybe is do like a sponsor for the non-paying version. Maybe
Hmm.
I'll do a sponsored by Unconventional Acquisitions. But like, for instance, the cool part about Unconventional Acquisitions is it actually has a lot of really good content. So we'll do embedded content, like here's how to buy a laundromat with an exact breakdown of it. And if you want to go deeper into buying a laundromat, here's a link to Unconventional Acquisitions. So we'll give a lot away up front.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. So you're leading in with at least enough to get somebody started, but someone who realizes they need more handholding, they want more guidance. They are not quite you, who is just like ready to go do a thing. So I think like most of these interviews, I have someone screen share, they show us their newsletter, and then they walk through how they make decisions of what to put in there.
Yep.
I think we're going to like combine and do like a hybrid, because the conversation that people are going to be super excited about, which, feel free to share just as much as you want to before you actually go into contrarian cash flow and you actually are doing this again, but with even more in-depth conversation. What you have already put together about acquisitions, and I'd love to know like which acquisitions you've already had success with and how those are yielding this expertise, because I think we all know we learn as we stumble. At
Yeah,
least I do. Like
exactly.
I teach my daughters, like we fail our way forward.
Yep, it's
So
so
I
true.
think that's what people really enjoy about getting advice from someone who has been through the trenches of something. But I always advise, like, that doesn't mean that you're not going to go through those trenches as well. Like, because whatever advice they are able to offer, like, you still kind of got to experience a few of the pains of growing if you want to. So I'm going to hand it over to
100%.
you for a screen share, and would love, she put together an issue that has like a breakdown of acquiring newsletters, why she thinks that's a better model than starting from scratch. And our audience in particular may be interested in this because there's a lot of newsletters on the market right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's not as many as I'd like. They're hard to
Mm-hmm.
find. It's like everything in life. Usually when I write this, somebody puts like, well, I've never seen one before. Can you really do this? It's like, come on, guys. If there were signs on every corner, it wouldn't be a deal. Like, you got to do a little work, like you talked about. You got to get your hands dirty.
Yeah, like
Um,
creatively search Google instead of just
exactly. Can you please give me a 10x business for $0? Um, but essentially, so lots of different things to dissect here. So here's an example of contrarian thinking, and you can get some anxiety from the amount of tabs I have open too while you're at it. Um, but
I'm completely, that's my zone. I'm completely
I
comfortable.
know. I know, so silly. So usually how contrarian thinking works is I try to have some storytelling and some interesting portions to it,
Hmm.
because I think if you're only talking about money or deals or, sort of aggressive things happening in the world, then you lose people. We do like to be entertained, right? You got to be both. It's not enough to just be smart. And so this one starts off talking about, if you guys haven't seen this movie, which is The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, oh man, it's amazing. It's about a guy who he uh, he had a stroke and lost all movement, then woke up in a coma the year later and only had the use of one eye, could only blink one eye, that's it, and wrote an entire book by blinking his one eye. So, like, zero excuses, basically, was the way I started this one.
Hmm.
But it's a beautiful book
Well,
and movie.
what I love, in addition to the captivation of that story, is that you do a thing that some writers just don't get, like they haven't gotten there yet, which is you open a loop in that intro that you close at the end of the email.
Yeah.
Um, so that induces the scroll.
Yeah.
So just if you're writing a newsletter, pay attention to that. Like I feel like a personal intro is so much more valuable than a like launch right into seriousness. Even if you're a serious person, like having some part of your personality in that uh, makes it distinct from anyone else and makes it something that no one else could have published.
Yep.
You're
I
not
totally agree.
competing with anyone but yourself at that point.
Yep. I do think it's really important too. I mean, if I was to tell you, like, yeah, let's have a conversation about newsletter acquisition and doing due diligence on newsletters, you're like, that's really not that entertaining for anybody. But if I'm like, I wrote a newsletter and I figured out a way to generate $329,000 in profit off of it. So let's break down like the how, the why, the what the fuck of buying a newsletter. You're probably like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that sounds kind of interesting. And so that's how I try to run these. Um, and I think, kind of a few things to go through here. Basically, I start usually first with like why. Why is this interesting? So context always leads to outcome. And so in this one, I basically say, why would you want to buy a newsletter? Why is that interesting besides in Codie's crazy cranium? And so, first it would be the margins are good, AKA you make a lot of money without having to have huge volume, which I like. Um, there's a model called Benjamin Buttons. I don't know if you guys follow Scott Galloway on No Mercy, No Malice, but he's great. And he talks about businesses that have the Benjamin Button model. So they get like younger and better looking as they get older. And
Mm-hmm.
newsletters do too, because of SEO and because of backlinks and because of, amount of subscribers that attribute to it. So there's the opposite of ageism.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part that I really like is you can actually sell them very easily for solid multiples. And the reason why is because it's very straightforward. You have a subscription-based model, which us investors love. It means it's like an annuity, you just keep earning. And then also it's very straightforward. If you're going to go buy a laundromat, you got to literally count coins to make sure that they're not lying to you about how much money they make. But if you buy a newsletter, you don't have to do that because the money all comes through Stripe and it's very clean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Number four is less risk than other digital assets. So basically, and this is maybe a Codie bias, which is lots of other digital assets, they have a lifetime. So if you have like an Amazon business, Amazon can come in and they can create their own products that's just like yours, and they can, get you out of the
Mm-hmm.
game.
Yes.
Or if you do an ads model, that's tough because they can, come in and change up the algorithm. You can be out of bounds. So it's a little bit less risk and a little bit easier, no code, anything like that. Then this part's huge. So when you buy a business, we'll get into this really quickly. You buy a business, a small business, anything less than, let's say, $5 million in revenue off of one thing, profit. It's always 2 to 3x the profit is really the range of prices.
Mm-hmm.
So if I make 100K in profit a year, then I can sell my business for 200 to 300K. And so if your business has 200,000 subscribers, but you've only figured out how to monetize them to the tune of $50,000, then I get your business for, let's call it 150. And with that business, I could probably take it and in 1 year double or triple your amount of revenue. And so that under monetization is nice. we can skip that. These are like much more detailed. So if you want to really see like, okay, here's a different way that they value it, and here's a different way that they
Mm-hmm.
value it. I give you 3 options. Valuation's a dance. It's not a science. Then the cool one is what you're talking about here, and then interrupt me with any of these. But I essentially have 6 revenue lines that I either have turned on or I'm going to turn on for contrarian thinking.
Okay.
So first, I have info products. This was like super early. I sold like some guides forever ago on Gumroad that were basically like how to get into cannabis and maybe how to get into venture capital. They make like very little, like a couple $100s a month for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I kind of forgot about them. They just sit there. Um, then, so that's one. What I didn't have on here at the time, oh yeah, I do. I put in affiliates. Okay. Then premium membership is what we talked about. In this one, I say that the premium membership is $10 a month. And essentially the rule of thumb, I think, Substack says that if you have 100 subscribers, 5 of them will subscribe to your premium newsletter. I think that's too high. I think the average is actually closer to 2 out of 100. So you have about
Okay.
a 2% conversion rate. And then ad revenue is an option. I don't do that right now. I probably will eventually. YouTube ad revenue, we're going to start that with contrarian thinking as well. Affiliates, this is where I put my info products in. Unconventional acquisitions makes a cut of every sale. And then other revenue options like a mastermind, podcasts, consulting, whatever. And so if I blow this up, essentially what it looks like is this is on 20,000 subscribers. That was basically where I was maybe 3 or 4 months into the newsletter. And what you can see is with 20,000 subscribers and these underlying assumptions that I told you about, affiliate payouts GG is just another company that I own that I could do a affiliate revenue share with. It's a small product, so it probably wouldn't do much. And the moral of the story in this one, we'd make about 100K and we'd keep about $58,000 of that. So that's with 20,000 subscribers. You could be, after Substack 10% payout, which is crazy, and 3 to 5% Stripe payout,
We have
and
three.
assuming, yeah, and
Expect
assuming I
some
have an
interesting
admin.
news soon.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be good. Well, God, I hope they do it before I move off the thing because
No, I'm saying expect some interesting news from Curated soon.
oh, good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's way too much. But you could make 60K a year on a 20,000 person newsletter, only charging $10 a month with a 2% subscription rate,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually pretty decent. And then I take it to $100,000 subs, which gets you to about 330 in profit, which is pretty good. So let me pause there. Is there anything that you think I should dive into?
Yes. Okay. So I want to think about you're paying to hire help,
Mhm.
and because I think that people who are considering like going big with newsletters versus like small and niche, and I could have 50
Mhm.
subscribers and whatever. Like if you're thinking of going larger and you're thinking of buying newsletters, especially if you're thinking of buying them and keeping them what they are versus like I'm curious, are you keeping people on and employing them and letting them continue to run their newsletter but you're now their boss, or like how, like what kind of models have you come up with and which ones do you favor?
Yeah, no. So I don't do that. When I buy
Mm-hmm.
newsletters, I'm really buying subscribers.
Right.
So the goal for me is um, complete pull of subscribers from another newsletter to Contrarian Thinking.
Okay.
This is different than there's lots of different ways you could run it. A lot of people want to buy a business and have it cash flow for them. I'm less interested in that, and I want like big unfair advantages that happen because I already have an ecosystem. So
Mm-hmm.
like this newsletter down here that I was looking at buying, I actually decided not to buy this one, which we can talk about why. It basically was like kind of like a lowbrow finance site. So like stock photos and articles on budgeting, and wasn't really anything that creative, but they'd been doing it with ad sales. And so they'd grown 250K emails, but I didn't know how engaged those individuals
Right.
were. So I didn't want to keep running this one. I wanted to transition all of them to contrarian thinking through opt-in opt in. You can't auto transfer them. That's illegal.
Right.
Um, and then I wanted to take the 50K Facebook group and create contrarian thinking because I don't have one. So all of it would be to funnel in. But this thing was making about 8K a month profit. So if you were just, if you didn't have a newsletter, you could absolutely take something like this and that would be a turnaround. So if I bought this newsletter straight out, I'd rebrand it, I'd get better content writers. I rarely keep the operator of the business on because they're usually selling for a reason.
Right.
And then I would turn it around and try to, 2 to 10x the profits.
By absorbing it opt in to your existing ecosystem.
Yeah, well, that would be model one. But the one I was just talking about would be if, say, you had the same
Oh,
newsletter in
you're
front of
saying
you.
just keep running it, but better.
Yeah, exactly. Turn it around. Yep.
Exactly. Okay, so what is your vision as a portfolio of newsletters? To have multiple newsletters around the same topics with multiple writers, like writing across, or like basically what you're talking about is almost like an independent media group at that point, right?
Yeah. Well, a good friend of mine, Noah Kagan, basically, he gave me great advice. And he was like, first of all, stop calling it a newsletter. He's like, it's a media business. And I was like, oh, take
Yay.
it easy. Yeah. It's whatever I want to call it, buddy. But he was right. So I need to start calling it a media business. But my thought, so here's where I struggle. I think a lot of media businesses get into trouble because they try to do massive content creation. So it's like, instead of one product a week we send out, it's something daily. And instead of something daily, then it's 3 times a day. And then it's across 77 social media sites. And then it's a podcast. And then it's a da da. And it's a lot. And so the thing that I think I'd rather do is come up with unique ways to go deeper with people than have a billion different types of content. It's just a personal preference. I also don't think you should spend your entire life in content. Like I think you should come for a specific reason and then get out. And so what I would do what I do when we acquire newsletters is like we're acquiring right now a newsletter community, which will be the back end for one of my other newsletters called Grow Getters. And so I have Contrarian Thinking, which is think critically and cash flow unconventionally. And then we have Grow Getters, which is growth hack your way into any subscriber base, emails, followers, whatever. And so those two, what I see is building like a little universe around them. They're both the sun, and around them is a Facebook group. And then there is also, we take the newsletter that we do each week and we have an audio version of it. And then maybe we have a YouTube version of it. So it's the same thing pushed out multiple times as opposed to, and in multiple ways, because maybe you like to view it and I like to hear it, as opposed to having to come up with a ton of new content. But I could see a future in which there's contrarian cash flow, and then there's contrarian careers, and then there's contrarian X and Y and Z. And it's 4 specific subgroups. We'd really have to scale before we get there.
Okay. So what I like about what you're saying is don't make content, like don't use the bandwidth that content requires to create daily, like stretch your content to it's the money that it can earn versus like, oh my gosh, we've got to be like Vox or something and we've got to put out 5 pieces a day in each category and like take over the world. This seems more like let's stay niche, but let's like really pack the value into each piece and then extend that across mediums.
Yeah. I mean, I'm relatively lazy on content creation. So I want to write what I want to write to get the portfolio of small bets that I want personally. And that's where contrarian thinking started. So, I try to not write anything that I'm not going to actually use myself. I don't have anything that's clickbaity because all of it is actually something I put into play. And so the idea of just creating content in order to have volume doesn't really appeal to me that much. And I think it's too easy to fail. It's too easily to burn out for like the people listening who are brand new to this. Doing a daily newsletter is tough, man. So like set yourself up for success. And then if you really dig it, add more episodes or add more platforms.
So here's a good question. Because my optic is contrarian thinking. So I don't have what is the structure of these other newsletters that you're dealing with and things along those lines is where do you land? And I don't believe in the phrase former journalist. I feel like if you're a journalist at one point in time, you continue to be so, right?
I can
Or
get
at
on
least,
board with that.
yeah. And so where do you land on the value of really good curation? And when I say really good, I define that as curation that sifts through the noise and finds good stuff and then shares it with context or personality or opinion of the curator. Where do you land on that as a way to beef up content without creating from scratch?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think if done well, it's incredible. I mean, Trends does that to a degree. They obviously create some of their own content too, but I think probably the most valuable thing they do is the Facebook group and the community highlights each week.
Mm-hmm.
And so Trends basically just highlights for people listening that don't know, what are the trends happening in the world of business so you can capitalize on it and make your own business, or add it to your revenue stack for your business as you have now. So I really like that type of curation. And they have another one called The Hustle, which I love, which is just business content sort of curated and presented in a pithy and snarky manner. So those I think are both interesting, as long as I think the thing that sometimes creators forget is can people leave your newsletter with one of three things? Can they leave either having made money, in my opinion, is one of the biggest drivers.
Mm-hmm.
Having made them think is another big driver, or having given them something that they would have gotten from nowhere else. And I think if you can do one of those three things, then you can be really successful in a newsletter. And there's certainly other newsletters that are just beautifully written and you lose yourself in them, but those are fewer and far between.
True.
And they're harder to monetize.
True. Okay, so in terms of, you've got me thinking about nomenclature and is calling something a newsletter business somehow, does it feel less intimidating / serious / traditional because of the climate right now in which newsletters are hot, than calling it a media group? And is that what attracts us to that term?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Because when I think about even the word media, it's got a little bit of a negative connotation these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it depends on to whom, if I'm going to a group of investors and I say I have a media business that does $1 million in revenue off of info products with one employee and 80% margins, they're like, okay, yeah, sign me up, but if I say to you, I have a media company and I want you to subscribe, I don't know, maybe that has a different feel to it. And maybe it'd be better to say, I write and create content around unconventional ways to cash flow, and I'd love to have you along for the journey.
I think that would be interesting to explore. Okay, so now I'm challenging myself to, one thing that you were talking about is newsletter as part of ecosystem, right? And I have very few people that I interview who don't also have a podcast or also have a Facebook group or some things like that. So let's talk about the importance of diversity within a brand or that community sense. And maybe you've written about this because I see you scrolling.
I know. Yeah, well, I think I think you nailed it. I mean, I wrote a piece a while back. I do love the infinite searchability of Substack. But there's a couple different things. I wrote about creating a flywheel and basically how, the attention economy and attention arbitrage can lead towards this flywheel where it's hard to push in the beginning, but just like a wheel on a dam, the more water that gets in it, it just runs by itself continuously after you get the thing going, right? And so to your point, I think it's tough to do, but I think there's a ton of value to having sort of, here's my flywheel, for instance, your social media channels. So the social media that I'm a part of, the unconventional acquisitions, that's the mastermind group. Then there's my private equity fund, Entourage Effect Capital's LinkedIn and Twitter. So this is like kind of what I started with. And I didn't really have anywhere to capture them besides that. And then I essentially created a newsletter, which led to a couple different websites for all of this, which leads to like more speaking events and podcasts and things like this, which leads to more followers to social media, which leads to more newsletter subscribers, which leads to more, right? And so I do think you're right in that you need to have a few platforms to meet people where you are, but it's a balance. Everybody's like talking about Clubhouse. I'm like, I can't do it. I can't do another platform. I'm not interested. I don't want to listen to random people talk all day. I'm not doing it.
So wrapping back to newsletter acquisition, I spoke with someone recently who defined, he said, really, it's not worth trying to sell ads until you've got at least 20,000 subscribers or even more. What are your thoughts on, are there any caps or limits, even with paid, that you would say, you should have this before you try this? Because what I love about the conversation we've had is that you've gone a year, you have 100K subscribers, but you're not talking about these projections or these numbers you're trying to hit. You're talking about you've built an audience for a future project. And I think our best newsletter creators are the ones who start with passion and not with and if by month 5 it's not making this, I'm out the door. They see beyond that phase you're going to hit, which is should I or shouldn't I be doing this? So have you kind of created in your mind some caps or goal or benchmarks that people should hit before they attempt a certain revenue tactic?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We were just writing about that the other day. Maybe I haven't flushed. You know what? I'm gonna post it eventually. It's in my business model for contrarian cash flow, but which is really just a Word doc. I don't get too crazy with this stuff. Yeah. So I think they're right. Even at my size, I don't do ads. I've gotten asked about sponsorships. It's just a lot of work. It's a lot. There's no automated manner that allows for newsletters that aren't doing quite a lot of subscribers that I like, that you can curate the ads enough on that do ads, in my opinion. So I only want to do ads and sponsorships with stuff that I actually use and with things that I've actually tried and with things that I actually believe in. I don't like having to script the copy exactly like somebody else wants to do. I probably wouldn't even do ads until I had somebody else that could deal with all of that, because it makes it so much easier to monetize with info products and with paid subscriptions than to add ads on top of them, because you know what you're getting every single month. So maybe I'm just not good at it and somebody will come on board with me that's like, oh, I'm just great at ads and you're an idiot and you've been leaving all this money behind and here's how to do it.
Yeah,
it'd be great. But as of right now, it's just not something that I want to spend time on. I'd rather create great content, grow a ton, monetize off stuff that I own and own 100% of the revenue, as opposed to, whatever percent an advertiser would give you.
Yeah. And so with paid, you haven't launched paid yet. You're at a year. There are a lot of people who want to launch paid a month or two in. And my advice with that is usually do you really feel like you will have found your voice and your audience at that point to be able to charge? So do you preach patience in that realm as well? What's your advice to someone?
Yeah, I mean, Well, one, I do think it's great. You should be paid to create if you're creating
Hmm.
things that people find valuable. So there's nothing that I see wrong with that. Um, but I do think it needs to be meaningful for you in order, like, at least for me to feel good about what I'm delivering. Um, if I only make $100 a month on contrarian thinking, am I really going to feel like that's enough for me to care about this? I almost think it gets reverse psychology then if you're not getting enough cash flow in the
Hmm.
beginning. The other thing that I stress about sometimes, and we're going to work it on the launch of contrarian cash flow, is like there is a power to you only get to launch paid once, right? And so, can you do it really well? Can you have a launch strategy that's like well executed, where you've actually thought about it, where you've gotten some hype around it, and where you get enough people where there's a little bit of a community in the paid subscribers? Because that to me is the key for these newsletter businesses. Is it's not a media company, like you said, that you can't touch or feel close to. It's largely a human or a group of humans.
Hmm.
And so I do think it helps to have as many paid as you can starting. So it's not just like you and crickets on whatever you're engaging on. So I think the same thing. I don't have like I really don't think you probably should go paid or do ads or anything like that until you've hit 20,000 subs, except if you're in a super specific niche
Hmm.
and it's like massively valuable and people will pay for it, like, gaming codes or like, something like that. You could probably, or like, Ferrari owners, you could probably charge a lot and you wouldn't need a big audience because they're obsessed with it and are willing to pay.
Okay, so then one thing that we didn't hit on is metrics and which metrics you care about in the newsletters you publish. And I'll let you fly with that, but a lot of people talk about open rates and a lot of people talk about click throughs and things along those lines. What to you indicates success?
Um, you know, um, yeah, I think it's subscriber growth.
Hmm.
Um, so I want, new contrarians added weekly. It's definitely how many people actually view the post. So that's important to me. I prefer more comments and likes. It's hard. I end up getting like 50 emails for every newsletter, which is one of the obnoxious things about Substack, because I wish they would go comment. So I'm trying to train them more to comment on the post so that if we're going to talk about something, everybody can learn about it instead of just me. So I do pay a lot of attention to, are they responding to me? Is it interesting enough that they fire something back to me or
Hmm.
comment? And then of course, open rate. And besides that, that's all I really care about. In the future, I will care about how many people subscribe from each issue, and I will care about how many people buy some of our info products based upon the newsletter. But right now, it's just subscribers, it's how many people read it or your open rate, it's how many people actually comment on it, and it's certainly how many people, even if they're not commenting, are engaging with me via email. That's probably all I care about.
Okay. Great. Well, do you think there's any other aspect that we've left out? We could talk about newsletters for 2 days straight and not
I know.
cover everything. So I kind of wanted to isolate our conversation around acquisition and revenue models
Yeah.
and some of the growth you've experienced. Anything else you can think of that you would tell someone who is like, oh, maybe I shouldn't just be writing this newsletter. Maybe I should be considering this as like a revenue stream that I'm about to start acquiring others and things along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, my motto's always been like, why build when you can buy some aspect of it.
Hmm.
So I do think if if you're interested in playing in the space, but there's a lot of creators who like to create and they don't like to growth hack. They don't want to go get subscribers. They don't like that aspect of the business. It seems overwhelming. They're maybe not good at it. It's not in their skill stack. For those types of people, I think acquisitions is really smart
Hmm.
because maybe you are an incredible writer and creator, but if a tree falls in the woods, like, does anybody hear it? So for them, I would say, I wrote that article about it, so you can see it if you Google, like, it's the one that says Had a Stroke, Wrote a Book, and this makes
Yes,
329
yes.
with profit. You
Hmm.
can look at that, but you can also go to Empire Flippers. You can go to Flippa. You can go to Deuce, Duuce, which is a newsletter acquisition site, and look at how to acquire subscribers. And then, sing your song to them, as opposed to having to go and acquire the audience as well as write and sing the song.
Okay, so here's a good question that just occurred to me, and we will wrap after this because I've taken up some of your quality time, and I know you have a list in front of you of other things you're supposed to do this hour, and that is, have you bought a newsletter and transitioned those people with an opt-in to contrarian thinking, and what was like the conversion rate on transitioning?
Question. Yeah, so we actually bought a newsletter and email list. The other trick here is sometimes if you say buy a newsletter, you'll self-limit yourself. You're also just looking for a big email list.
Okay.
So, there may just be a website that has 50,000 followers, which is what we did. And this website was it was an attorney website. And this website was about sort of like things that can go sideways in acquisitions of a certain type of business. And anyway, so we did buy this email list that had a newsletter that went out consistently, kind of a crappy one, with 50,000 subscribers, and we transitioned it to our email list at Unconventional Acquisitions. And so that one, I should go look at like the updated numbers, but what we did first is just redirect the website to howtobuiasmallbusiness.com, which is our website. So that was just a redirect that happened. And then we have a drip sequence that we put on that's probably comprised of about 15 or 20 emails that go out to this, group of email subscribers, asking them to opt in. We started with an email list of 800 at Unconventional Acquisitions, just from me announcing on Contrarian Thinking and whatever. And I don't know the exact attribution from the 50K list versus some of them come from Unconventional or from Contrarian Thinking too. But now we're at probably 25,000 subscribers on Unconventional Acquisitions. Okay. So, I think you should probably assume something like a 20 to 30% transition rate if you have to do opt-in. And you can't just continue running the newsletter as is to those people in the same business. But, we're continuing to email those individuals under the other allowance of the business. So, right. It could theoretically be more.
It'd be interesting to see if the transition rate, like the people who converted, were also like kind of pretty much aligned with the engagement rate that they had when you purchased. Like, were the people who are engaged with them also the ones who engaged?
Like person for person.
Yeah.
Sam's engaged here, Andy's going to be engaged here.
Or even the percentages. Like if 30% are engaged, you might, so that you could start to potentially see patterns in that and know, like, if there is a 30% engagement rate on the emails they send, we expect a 25% transition rate out of the whole or something. Like, if you could start to calculate in that direction.
Well, I probably wouldn't use us as an example there because their engagement rate was pretty low. It was like 18% or something was the open rate on the emails for them. And so we've definitely pulled over more subscribers than were engaged there. But that's also because their content was really, really poor. And so,
you came in and said, hey, here's something better. Like,
and we were very aggressive, like, new ownership, new update, never been done before. The other thing you can do too is, like, a lot of times these other newsletters have multiple emails they can get sent from. So if there are people that, if it's been getting sent from Codie at Contrarian Thinking, and you don't really love what Codie's doing at Contrarian Thinking, but they also have under their, back office infrastructure, a X email, which is usually how it works. Then you try sending from multiple of those and see how you can capture them. And there you do have to get a little clickbaity with the titles. So we would be a little
click baking is better.
Nobody wants anything on baking.
That's my new website, click baking.
I liked the jobby. I wrote that one down. Passion plus hobby is jobby. That's funny. I'm going to use that somewhere. I'll credit you.
Thank you, Codie, for talking with us today. I hope everyone has gotten some exciting ideas about newsletter acquisition business. Don't call it a media group. We don't want to hear that. And I feel like we should return like in a year or some spans of time, because like you're going to like share more of your journey with us. Everyone go subscribe. Links are going to be in the description below. I also, Codie, I put an opportunity for people to ask questions in the YouTube comments below.
Yeah.
So if you share this with your audience, I share it with mine, then we might have a little conversation going on a different platform. So thank you so very much for your time. Everyone, think contrarianly.
I love it.
Yeah. Okay.
Ashley, it was such a pleasure. Let's stay in touch.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care. Bye.